We have Tim McIlrath joining us today from Rise Against. Talk about the upcoming new Rise Against record, as well as the rise of the Roach tour with Papa Roach. And just thanks for joining us today. If you can, let's start there. The first new music from Rise Against in 3 years. What was the gap in between like?
It was I feel like I would describe it as a band, any band, all the bands you talk to are when you talk to them, they are in four different phases of their working career. They are either touring, they are recording, they are writing, or they're just taking a break, right? Um, and I feel like we did all those things. We wrote Nowhere Generation. We toured the shit out of it. Especially in a post-COVID world, took us longer to kind of get around every corner of the world where there are Rise Against fans. Um, and then we sort of took a little time off just after all that touring, just to kind of like remember what our own names are. You know what I mean? And then when we finally got the appetite to do it, we started writing for the next album and kind of put it together at like our own pace, so it wasn't like too rushed. And we started doing that, I don't know, like I guess like a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, at this point. And so what you're hearing now is kind of stuff that we worked on almost like a year ago at this point.
So tell us a little bit about the new single because this is kind of a call to action type of song. How did Nod come together?
Nod was like it was sort of like a message or a communication to our fans and our community and this like reminder that we have each other. You know what I mean? It wasn't so much like it was like a call to action in the sense that like here's what you're gonna do. We're gonna go out and we're going to fight these things that make us mad. It was more like here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a breath and assess the situation and look around and see who's on our side and who's still on our side. And that's what the nod was. It was like when you make eye contact with somebody and you see like, oh, you and me, like we're in this together. I can tell that you understand what I'm talking about, that you understand what I'm saying. I think that's the first step to like a call to action, is that first you see who your allies are, who your friends are, who are the people there who share a similar perspective and have a similar vision for what the future could be. And that's sort of nodding. And I think that that's sort of like it on a socio-political level. And on a much more like basic level, nodding is like the other guy in the Jawbreaker T-shirt on the street that you're walking down that you see the other guy carrying or girl carrying a skateboard and you're like, oh yeah, like like the other person that's in line with you at a show or the person that gets mad at somebody taking advantage of somebody weaker on the street. Like that's the nod that we do to each other all the time. We're constantly nodding to each other to find like our peers and our friends and people who like see the world the same way we do.
I love that dual messaging.
Mhm.
You guys came up in like an era where there was definitely a rise in political and social activism, especially within rock and punk rock. You had Warp Tour, political compilations like Rock Against Bush. Do you feel there's been a movement in recent years to sort of quiet some of the musicians' political voices to a certain extent?
I don't know if there's any sort of organized movement to silence musicians. I think that in today's social media world, we are much more, um, I think, available as musicians, and like the opinions of our fans are much more present. Whereas, like in before social media, that was something that like maybe you heard on the street or whatever. And so I think like artists can allow themselves to be influenced by like the messages on their social media, or they can do what all of our favorite artists did growing up in like the 80s and 90s. They just persevered. And so is there an effort to silence people? I think if you're listening to the wrong people, I think if you're putting too much stock in like say trolls on the internet, then yeah, that pressure might get to you and you might be a people pleaser and you just want to make people happy and you can't stand seeing um a bad comment about your band. But if you're like us, like we grew up in hardcore and punk rock, We've always kind of carved our own path. We've never been, I think, susceptible to that. I also know that it doesn't out here in the real world, it doesn't represent like our fan base and sort of who they are, what they believe, and how badly they need a band like Rise Against to kind of echo the way they feel, which is that's my commitment to you when I go on stage every day or I write a song, is to like be there for the people who feel alone and are looking for music to reflect the way they feel about the world. I'm not there for the trolls. I'm not there. If Rise Against isn't your thing, that's okay. Like that's the way this works. You know what I mean? Like I'm there for the people that find this music healing, that see this music as some sort of remedy to the ills of society.
To sort of be a voice for the voiceless?
Yeah, absolutely. So like, I don't see like, if you're a musician and like, or any sort of artist, and like making as many people happy as possible, then you are going to be susceptible to any effort to silence your message. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But that's never been our mission statement or our goal. It's not how we got into this. It's not how like the bands we grew up got into this, and so we sort of like I feel like if people aren't pushing back on a band like Rise Against, then we aren't doing enough. You know what I mean? Because I know that our opinion is not shared by everybody, and my favorite bands were ones that were sort of polarizing.
Coming back to the social media thing for a second, that's sort of like your direct line of communication a lot of times to your fans. Is that sort of the scariest thing about Elon Musk buying Twitter, is that he now has the ability to suppress voices or sort of limit their reach for people that don't agree with his political agenda or views?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of like when you have one person that kind of monopolizes a forum that we all sort of become addicted to or just all use to communicate with each other. You risk that for sure. I think of it the same way like Steve Albini looked at vinyl and digitizing music, which like I think that like what the common story that you hear is that Steve Albini l- preferred the way vinyl sounded over to digital music, and he was a advocate for that. But if
Mhm.
you really hear what he was talking about, he was so concerned about giving all of your music, like the master files of your music, to this like digital database that could now control the way it was being heard. Where a vinyl at one point was like a physical thing that you owned, or even a CD was a physical thing you owned. And so when your life's work as art can only be communicated through one private company. I mean, there's several now, but who knows? Maybe there will be only one at some point. It's like too much control to give all your music to. Like, if somebody shut off the spigot of Spotify right now, how many artists like their works just kind of disappear? For people who don't own it like physically. And so that's the risk when you monopolize something like that. Yeah, the risk is that its existence falls to the whims of like the billionaire class, who we know from history are not the most stable of people. And so yeah, like the fact that we communicate through things like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and yet these things are owned by problematic oligarchs in our society, it's something we should all be concerned about, especially as you see people like the Dropkick Murphys get, shut down, or you get see a friend of mine who's a DJ in Chicago. I just saw his thing got shut down. Like that's a scary thing. Like we've handed a lot of power to um, some pretty uh, some pretty powerful people, in the
Mhm.
White House, and so I think that's something that we should all be concerned about.
The Dropkick Murphys thing, that sort of went viral over the last like 24, 48 hours, and having those, somebody sort of openly, oppose their political views. Have you had those sorts of instances at Rise Against shows, or?
Um, yeah, I'm sure we have. I mean, I'll be honest, like I'm up there and I do my show, and it's not like a Q&A session. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so,
Right.
and I've been doing this long enough, especially as a band that was born in a post 9/11 America, singing songs against the war in Iraq. I've been doing this long enough to know that not every single person in my crowd is on my side. and that there is dissent being created. And I've been doing this long enough too to be like a person that has simultaneously faced like accusations of like you're putting too much politics in music, like let's just have a good time. But then the other side, it was like, oh, you're just preaching to the converted. We all agree with you, you know? And so when you're an artist, you at some point you just have to kind of like move forward and just communicate your vision, your art, your message, and what you do without letting that sort of thing get distracted. Like I know that there's people in our crowds or on our message boards or whatever that we won't see eye to eye with, but it doesn't change like our mission.
You can connect with the message of the music, but you can also connect with the music sonically, right?
Well, you have to connect with music sonically, otherwise like your message will get lost. You know what I mean? Um, the the music is the medium um, that is sort of it's the most important in the sense that like without it, you're not reaching like the people that identify with your band. Like the music is important, and then for a band like us, like and for me personally, music became interesting and how and why I've dedicated my life to it was not because I was like in music classes growing up and learning scales and instruments and music theory and those things. Those were things weren't interesting to me. They still are not interesting to me. It was when music fused with politics and like everything from Los Crudos to Rage Against the Machine. That's when it became electric to me. And I was like, oh, this is music at its most potent. This is music at its most powerful. And at least for me personally, this is scratching some itch. And so when I picked up a guitar and a microphone, like the politics weren't secondary to it. You know what I mean? They were always like together.
So when you connected with those bands, did it feel like it was possible for social change to occur through music, like listening to those bands?
Absolutely. Like for me, growing up as like a hardcore kid in Chicago in like the mid '90s, um, like there were so many ideologies that were introduced to me, not through my classroom, my peers, or my parents, but they were introduced to me through music. Like I had like concepts around environmentalism, I learned through bands like Earth Crisis. You know what I mean? The first time I heard the word sweatshop was at a hardcore show in Chicago. Um, the first time I learned about the exploitation of indigenous people around the world, colonialism, and all these, and how much of it was directed by the country I lived in. Like it was through songs, and so, and that's not even to mention animal rights. Like I haven't eaten meat since I was 17 years old, and that's because I went to a show at Fireside Bowl and picked up a pamphlet on what slaughterhouses are and what they do, and how many animals have to suffer in order to get meat on my plate. And
It's
so like I'm a
interesting.
living and breathing example of like music communicating and then changing my life here now 30 years later, but I'm still making the same decisions.
It's interesting you bring that up because, like, I think the first time I ever saw one of those videos or like got a PETA pamphlet was at a Rise Against show. So, here you are 20 years later, waving the flag for vegetarianism, being vegan,
Mhm.
and like we've come a long way to, Beyond Meat is readily available anywhere. Like 20 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Oh, it's come so far. You know what I mean? It's not as marginalized as it was. You can now people understand it, and whether they're into it for a health aspect, or if you're more like me, I'm in it for an animal rights aspect. Like whether a burger or a veggie burger is one is healthier than the other. You know what I mean? That doesn't make as much difference to me as like is there an animal somewhere literally suffering, like a sick animal suffering and dying to create this food? That's something that is more my concern. And that's not to mention, like, if you want to get really subculture, like, I'm straight edge to this day. I'm still straight edge from an ideology that was introduced to me through a music scene by bands like Minor Threat that were broken up, when I was 5 or 6 years old, you know? So, I don't know, music is obviously inform so much of my own life decisions. And so when you go to a Rise Against show and there's a PETA pamphlet like that's just us trying to like carry the torch, because it was something that was so important to us.
But you mentioned a band like Earth Crisis. Like back in the day, they were like breaking the ground for militant, straight edge, and they were out there preaching in a time where bands were glorifying excess and drugs and alcohol and women, and you had a band like Earth Crisis that was the polar opposite of that, and saying it's not okay to be out here and be fucked up all the time. So
Yeah, and I feel like they were like the '90s, like reiteration of something that like Ian MacKaye started in DC. That was like we can participate in music without it having to be this, like you said, this place of like excess and decadence. And we can and let's normalize that. Let's normalize like um being okay with not drinking, or doing drugs, or all the decadence that comes with like the rock and roll lifestyle. And that was something that, and they were doing it in this really assertive way. It wasn't
mhm.
like tie-dye, peace and love, hippie. It was like these really militant guys with camo cargo pants and bandanas, like singing about a firestorm. And so like a lot of us kind of identify with that anger as much as it is. I think it's like there's a certain element of like character to that they were taking on. Nobody was talking about, I don't think, hopefully they weren't talking about actually going around and burning down places, but and sometimes they were. But
Yeah.
I connected with that anger, and Earth Crisis is still doing it to this day. They're still making music and they're still talking about veganism and straight edge and that kind of thing. And they influenced a lot of us by making it the banner of their mission.
Yeah, I definitely think they broke down a lot of doors and made it okay for a lot of people to talk about some of those issues that weren't prevalent in music at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what can you tell us about the upcoming new record? We have the single out now. What's next, and what can you tell us with the record?
So we got a whole batch of songs that come from the same place that the song Nod comes from, that we produced with a woman named Catherine Marks, who people might know from like everything from Manchester Orchestra to Wolf Alice to St. Vincent to Boy Genius, and I think it's gonna be cool. I think Catherine was introduced to the band, but was not like intimately familiar with who we are and our history, which I think was kind of what we were looking for, was someone to walk into our world without any of like say the baggage of 9 records, and who we are and what we're supposed to do and what decisions we're supposed to make, what we're supposed to sound like. And it was a lot of fun to work with her. And so I think people will hear like a lot of who we are, no matter what. 'Cause I think no matter what, when the 4 of us touch instruments, like, it just comes out Rise Against. But I think you'll hear it through a bit of a different lens. So there's some traditional Rise Against on there, which I think of Nod as pretty traditional. And I think there's some curveballs on there I think people are gonna be, surprised by, and I'm excited about.
When you're a veteran band and you're recording, album after album, is it necessary to sort of have that fresh perspective from a new voice in the mix when it comes to a producer?
I think that the old me would have said no. And we've been like pretty stubborn and like elbows up about like how we do what we do. We've made 6 of our 9 albums with the same production team, which is Bill Stevenson and Jason Livermore at the Blasting Room in Fort Collins. And so that alone is sort of evidence that like these are guys who are stubborn. They want to go back to the same studio they always go to, and make music with the same people they always make it with. And I'm sure we will go back and do that again one day. Um, but this record just felt like time. It felt like it was like, let's try something different. Let's put somebody else at the wheel here and see what happens, which is a bit of a risk, of course. But I think at this point in our career, I think we're more open to risks, like we have um 9 records, we have a lot of songs, we have the songs people love to hear on stage live, like tonight in Houston with Papa Roach and Under Oath. And so we're always trying to write stuff that can compete with like the set list that we'll play tonight. What else can get on that set list? Like who can steal that spot? What song could steal the spot in that set list? And so I think I personally become more like open to that than I think I was in the past, which is I think I was a lot more protective and stubborn about the band and what it is and what it sounds like, and not willing to let anybody outside of it like that sort of tinker or tamper with it.
There's a lot of veteran bands out there that are talking about like they're not even going to release records at this point. They're just going to go the single route, or even some legacy acts saying that they're not going to put out new music at all just because people just want to hear the hits. Why is it important for you guys to still go the album route and continue to create new music?
I guess it's just our gut instinct is to do that, we're still part of us. As much as I say, like, we're so open to, like, different things, we're still some crew, like, old dogs, new tricks kinda thing, we do what we do, we like what we do, we like the outcome. I don't judge any band for however they decide to release music. I think that we live in the wild west of the music industry right now, where anything goes and it's changing every day, especially if you're starting out right now. Like, I don't know how that looks or works, You're talking to a guy who has I started putting out records before there was social media, and so I just know the way we've done it, and I'm probably the wrong guy to ask for advice on how to do it today. And so maybe it is not releasing full albums, maybe you're releasing singles, or maybe if you're a veteran act and you don't want to put in the energy and the money and the resources into creating new songs when, like you said, people want to hear old stuff all the time. Like, I don't judge that, but I think for us, it's just kind of there's still a fire in our belly to do that, and that's I think um the conundrum or the paradox of music is that nobody really wants you to go on tour until you've done a new record. And then when you get on tour, they just want to hear the old songs, you know?
Right.
So, but I think it's a good challenge too. Like, let's create something that can compete with the old songs and then see what happens.
You talked about being out with Papa Roach and Under Oath, and the first show is tonight. So, do you have a history with those guys?
Yeah, I mean, the last 20 years we've crossed paths with them, being in the same industry and playing a lot of the same music festivals and radio festivals and getting played on the same airwaves. We were signed by the same person to DreamWorks, actually. A guy named Ron Handler signed our band years after he'd signed Papa Roach. I think he also signed Sparta and stuff like that. And so we were label mates for a minute there. And every time we have crossed paths with them or played shows with them, always been just the nicest dudes on the planet. The drummer has some Fat Wreck history as well. It comes from the punk scene. Um, and so, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. It's something that we've kind of all talked about for years, and so it's finally coming together.
At this point in your career, do you still get the adrenaline rush at the start of a new tour?
Yeah, I do. I get the adrenaline rush every time I go on stage, and like, and I'll be honest, like, I can't do what I do without it. You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like it's sort of the thing that turns me into a person that is able to perform on a stage, is still being able to connect with the songs and the audience and the music. Because I think like I what I'm trying to say is, like, I'm unable to fake it. Like, my body literally won't perform the way it's supposed to perform if I'm faking it, if I'm going through the motions. Like, I need that rush. I need that to sort of go from Bruce Banner to the Incredible Hulk, you know? And so, like, luckily that still is there, and, like, hopefully it'll always be there. But it absolutely still comes. Every tour is different. Every city's different. Playing a show like tonight, I don't even know what, like, I haven't this tour hasn't started yet, so I don't know what the vibe's gonna be yet, or like the kind of people are gonna show up to this show. And so the audience you play for is different each time. So there's always something to, like, keep it interesting. The beginning of a tour is always fun because it's still very fresh.
Corey, our radio producer, just recently visited the Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas and said that Rise Against is well represented there. What does it feel like seeing your work in a museum among legends of the genre?
I mean, it's crazy to think that we have a place um, alongside bands that shaped who I am and sort of created this scene. That's been such a trip since this band started, because I've met so many of the people that I was in their front row. You know what I mean? Um, I was watching them play Fireside Bowl, you know what I mean? Or I was growing up listening to hardcore records and Fat Wreck stuff and all that stuff. And so just to have those people not just become like friends and peers, but also to have them kind of respect what I do, you know? That's a really cool, like full circle kid in a candy store kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like I still get excited to see bands like Quicksand and Hot Water Music and Refused, you know, and Sparta and all that stuff, and then to hang out with these guys and tell them like I was in your front row, you know what I mean? Like I would like your music like meant a lot to me, you know, and then take these bands on tour, which we've toured with all those bands I mentioned, you know. That stuff never gets old for sure.
Being a part of the Fat Wreck legacy, you know, and being around Fat Mike, you know, were you shocked to see them hang it up and retire last year?
You know, at first I was, and I went to the very final show in San Pedro, and then I thought about how those guys are like, I think they're about 10 years older than me, maybe a little more. And when I thought about it like that, I thought about doing this, like it seemed perfectly reasonable. You know,
Right.
it seemed like, oh yeah, like that's a good run, you know? Like I think they're either approaching 60 or at 60. Like that seems like if you want to hang it up at that age, like after everything you've done, like good on you. You know, like he's left an incredible and permanent mark with his band, but not just with his band, but the amount of bands he fostered. You know, like where's the world without Fat Records? You know, where's Rise Against without Fat Records? Um, and so he has an incredible legacy that he should be proud of, and so are the rest of the band. All three of those guys, all four of them, should be proud of what they've done.
Does seeing a band like that hang it up, or not call it quits, but like you know, put an end point on it, does that
Mm.
sort of make you think about you know, Rise Against's logical conclusion point?
Yeah, I mean, I thought our logical conclusion point was like 10 years ago. I didn't think anybody would still be letting us do this. I didn't think that we were the ones that were still going to be here, having survived the early 2000s. You know what I mean? I didn't think that we'd be the band that was the one that wasn't going to get dropped. You know, it's all seemed like a wild ride. I've always looked at it as a moment that could end at any point. You know, I'm probably only recently accepting like our longevity and that it could go on for as long as we want, you know, possibly with the, you know. So no, I don't think about it too much. I think the band's better now than we ever have been. I like the songs that we're writing. I like the shows that we're playing, and so I feel good about that. And that's all I can think about at the moment.
Couple more quick things before we wrap up, but baseball season's upon us. I know you're a big White Sox fan.
Yeah.
You got a chance to sing the national anthem at one of the games. Where does
Mm.
that rank among your personal career highlights?
Oh, like top five for sure. Like just growing up, my dad and I used to try to buy tickets from scalpers, you know, outside of Sox Park in like the 80s, trying to get to games like opening day. And then so to have a team like the White Sox invite me to opening day, you know what I mean? And like put my dad in a skybox and gets to watch his son like sing the national anthem, you know what I mean? While Chicago cheers on and like fighter jets fly over. Like that's huge. And it had to be the White Sox, you know what I mean? It couldn't any other baseball team, it wouldn't have meant as much to have this team, you know, do this. Uh the last real job I had before Rise Against, I worked as a ticket scalper and a ticket broker
Oh wow.
in Lincoln Park in Chicago. And so like I've been on those streets like trying to dodge cops, trying to sell Sox tickets to a park that was like kicking me out of there, you know? And so to be invited to a place like that is a full circle moment and a super nerve-wracking thing to do. I really recommend it.
What was your go-to pitch for scalping tickets? Do you remember?
Who needs two?
That's about as easy as it gets, right?
Exactly.
There's a lot of other rock guys who are big into baseball, especially Cubs fans. Billy Corgan, Eddie Vedder, Jack White. Do you ever run into those guys and talk baseball or talk a little trash?
Yeah, I sat next to Billy at a Cubs game a couple summers ago. with Tom Morello as well. Super nice guys, huge Cubs fans, and these guys are, they're Cubs fans, so they're on the other side of the aisle for me. But but I appreciate good baseball, and I was at a couple of those playoff games, or when the Cubs went to the World Series, I was at a couple of those games and ran into Jack White and Eddie Vedder. It was a fun time to be in Chicago, even as a Sox fan. Like, you recognize what an important thing it is for an underdog like the Chicago Cubs to go to the World Series, and so yeah, I crossed paths with those guys. White Sox have like Chance the Rapper's there sometimes, White Sox doesn't have the celebrity power that the Cubs have, but I think that makes us kind of the true underdogs.
So to wrap things up, then, what's next for Rise Against? You have this tour coming up, the record. What's on the horizon?
Let's see, it's a good question. I'm good at only focusing on my day at the moment. And but so we'll do Papa Roach, which is actually broken up into two different legs. It's this leg that we're doing now, which is about a month across North America. And then we will resume this tour in September, which will be the rest of North America, mostly East Coast, that we haven't done. In the meantime, we will head back to Europe for some festivals in late May, early June, things like Download Festival, Nova Rock, Southside Hurricane, Rock and Ring, Rock and Park, a whole bunch of big ass Eurofests. There's an All My Friends Fest in Canada. We're talking about going to Quebec City pretty soon, some weekenders. That's about it. And then looking forward to just kind of getting a whole bunch of new music to people very soon, which is our plan. We're just kind of firing on all pistons at the moment.
Awesome. We're super excited to hear the album and new music from you guys. So I appreciate you joining us.
We can't wait. Thank you to all of our fans who have stuck with us after all these years. Hope to see you on the road, and we can't wait to have people hear all this new music that we've been working on.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Cool.